Hello there, my name is Jordan Leroy Hansen, also known as Ledev, and I'm here to start with my review of the cards that are being revealed for the new Hearthstone expansion coming in December, Rastakhan's Rumble. Now, I decided to do some new things for this review to try to streamline the process a little bit and redo some of the cards that I reviewed already from the BlizzCon reveal, as well along with some other new cards that got revealed. Main reason why is because the last video I did of that, I was kind of half asleep, so I kind of want to go off a fresh start and with some, well, caffeine now, to actually just wake up and actually have some second thoughts on some cards, and overall just give a good, now a new thing for this review, a score rubric. So I got ratings for the cards, and the ratings go from this. Cards can either be rated to amazing, and an amazing card is a card that is a very, very high powerful card that someone can brew a deck around. Now, these are cards that can also give a very high power level upgrade to a potential deck archetype or to an existing deck archetype. And also, it's just a card that in general, when you look at it, you're like, actually, that's just a smart card to play in the current meta. Or maybe it's just a card that in general is just too good not to play, or at least toy with. Now, there's also the rating of good. When a card is good, it's a card that can complement a deck archetype, but it doesn't overall upgrade a power level of a deck. It's fun to toy around with without having too much backlash against a meta, and it's not much weakness, but there isn't like a significant strength to, say, make a dent in the meta. It's still going to probably see play, but it's one of those cards where it's like it's not going to turn the tides of a meta, so to speak. Then there's the rating, not great, but, and these are the cards that I give the not great but, is the cards that are, in general, are kind of bad. However, there are circumstances where it can be playable in a deck, or make a new deck archetype, but the cons are noticeable. Like, it's one of those where the fact that you're putting the card in your deck, you have to try to complement the weaknesses. If you don't, you're going to have a bad time, but it is possible at the very least. And then I have the rating of bad. And bad cards are cards that, it's always fun to say that, oh, you need to dust this card or such, but I don't really like to recommend dusting things. But in general, bad cards are cards that with very, 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 very fringe cases, mostly if you're wanting to make a meme deck or some sort, it's a really bad idea to play the card. Like, you're going to significantly lower the power level of a deck if you decide to play the card. Now, that we got all the ratings out of the way, let's actually get on to the cards. The first one we're going to talk about is the Sharkfin Fan, a 2-mana 2/2 pirate that has, after your hero attacks, summons a 1/1 pirate. Now, while it is fun to try to compare this to, say, Clinchbug from the Witchwood, I feel like the power level of Clinchbug is significantly better than Sharkfin Fan. And the reason why is because, well, the body. Like, the body becomes bigger with Clinchbug every time your weapon attacks, so it goes from a 3/3 to a 4/4. Which, in a manner around that time, on turn 3 to 4, trying to interact with a 4/4, except in some very fringe board states, it's very hard to interact with. Now, on the other hand, on the other side of the coin, there is a potential benefit that maybe generating 1 to 2 to who knows how many tokens you can generate with this in weapon-based classes, that it could actually provide a potential token sub-archetype in some classes. But the problem is, this scene will still stay a 2/2. And late game, this is going to feel like a really bad drop. Especially since, I mean, it might be relevant that the pirates are relevant, but I think the factor is they're trying to support the pirate archetype in Rogue a lot more. And unless they get like a Wind Fury type weapon or a weapon that can attack multiple times, yeah, Sharkfin Fan seems kind of very not great, but not a great card, but I do think there are some fringe token decks, or if a Pirates Matter deck can actually benefit a lot from this card, then they might try it out. But I don't think it's really that great. Next up is the Ticket Scalper. A 4-mana 5/3 with Overkill, draw 2 cards. Now, for those who are new to the expansion and don't know the new mechanics, one of the new mechanics is overkill, and this can apply. Overkill can be applied to weapons, minions, or spells. And basically, what it is they're going to be damage oriented mechanic where if you deal more damage to a minion than its current health, the overkill trigger will happen. So, for example, this has an attack power of 5. If you attack a 4 or less health minion, the overkill trigger will go into effect since you are doing more damage than you're doing more damage to its health than needed. And in this case, the overkill effect is draw 2 cards. Now, I feel like this card has the potential to be very powerful in Kelesef style decks. It could even fit into multiple Greyman even style decks. Like, I think this is going to be a fun card to toy with in Even Shaman. And being a pirate does help with the pirate meta decks that might come into the meta. The keyword is might. We still kind of need to see all the pirates from the set. But at worst, this can trade in mid game pretty well. But pretty much if there's any way you can buff this, like either with Kelesef or give it Rush or give it Stealth, then I think the card is surprisingly just a good card. You can test it in your decks, and I don't think it's going to be too detrimental to toy with it. So I think it's overall just a good card. Next up, the Belligerent Gnome, a 2-mana 1/4 with Taunt, and has a battle cry that if your opponent has 2 or more minions, gain +1 attack. And honestly, this is going to be a card that, there's a few of these cards where it's going to be due to the current meta, it's going to feel like one theme, where on the other hand, the actual rating is this. And this is a card that, with how much decks like Baku Paladin and Zoo Warlock are in the meta, this is a card that's going to feel amazing, but in reality, it's just a good card. And really, it's just a really good early game taunt to help against those aggro style token based decks. If you need it, here you go. But the problem is it's also going to be varied on the meta. Like, if those decks lose in popularity, then, or aggro zoo decks of that type lose in popularity, then this card in itself just becomes really low power level, because one of the main cons of this card is this is not a really great card to draw late game. This is a very dead draw late game, potentially. So, besides that, I think it's just a good early game taunt, but let's be honest, you're either going to play this or Tar Creeper, or a variation of the both. And overall, I'd say this is just a good card. You can test in your decks without a sweat, and you're probably going to feel good when you go against the one Baku Paladin or Zoo Warlock matchup where this card is very relevant. Next up is we're going to go from neutral to warrior cards that got revealed so far. In this case, we're going to talk about Sulfraze, which is a 6-mana 4/4 weapon with overkill. So we mentioned before, as long as this weapon deals damage over the health, the overkill trigger will go off, which in this case is you may attack again. So, as people know in Hearthstone, you can only attack with your weapon once, but this card cuts that rule out as long as the overkill trigger happens. And this card, because of that, and because of the high attack and durability, it's actually pretty amazing. This is an amazing card. The current warriors are kind of like more control-oriented, but there is always the popularity of the mid-range / aggro warrior. Like, people known the bane of the pirate warriors, but there's also been a good mid-range warrior deck from time to time, like Rush Warrior and such. And this card upgrades the power level of those decks quite significantly. Because the one thing that people will probably first look at this card, be like, oh, you can just use this as a board wipe and clear all the minions out. And just deal a little bit of damage to yourself, but hey, at least you don't have to worry about those problematic minions. No, the way you have to look at this card is, it's a card that you can attack 2 times in a turn. One to attack a minion, and one to attack the opponent's face. So this card essentially reads, deal 8 damage to the opponent's face, and deal 8 damage to problematic taunts or problematic minions. Or, it's versatile, so maybe you can go 16 damage in the face, or maybe you can use it as that cleared board wipe. And that's not even talking about that Warrior has ways to upgrade their weapons, and upgrading Sulfraze late game is actually potentially very powerful. So, yeah. Even in a weapon hate mana, you could just use this as a board wipe card. Overall, this card's amazing. It's going to see play. Be prepared for it. You're going to see it a lot. Unless Odd Warrior becomes a little bit higher tier up, and then you see Odd Warrior everywhere. But if you're playing another deck besides Odd Warrior, you're probably going to give this a shot. Next up, another warrior card, this time a spell, which is Heavy Metal! A 6 mana spell, which says summon a random minion with cost equal to your armor, up to 10. So, for people who know this card, they remember this as the end effect of Geosculptor Yip from Kobolds and Catacombs, but this is on a 6 cost spell. And honestly, it's a very peculiar card, because if there is a way to generate enough armor to get like 10 armor when you cast this on turn 6, it's actually a pretty good card. It kind of feels like if there's a way to keep 10 armor and then play this on turn 6, getting a 10 drop on turn 6 is very, very, very powerful. But the problem is, in general, the armor you're going to have in Warrior is going to vary depending on your matchups and such. And honestly, the card is amazing if you can play it at 8 to 10 mana, but it feels bleh if you play this at 6. Like, it's not bad, but it's not great. And the problem is, I feel like that variance in itself is going to make the card not great. But if we do get a lot more even enablers for armor generation for even warrior, this might be an interesting card to test in even warrior style decks, like the general Greymane even style warrior decks. I don't think it's going to be a great addition, but I do think it's worth a shot for testing purposes. But yeah, besides that, the card's not really that great. Next up, we're going from the warrior cards revealed to now the warlock cards. And the first one they revealed is actually talking about the new mechanic, which are each class is going to get a special unit called Spirit. The Spirit of the blank. Now, what spirits are, they're 0 free minions that have stealth for a turn, but they have a potential very powerful effect that the player can use. So, for example, for Warlock, they get the Spirit of the Bat, a 2 mana brain fart, a 2 mana 0 free, which for stealth for 1 turn, and then after a friendly minion dies, give a minion in your hand +1/+1. Now, we have seen for Warlock a lot of aggro to Zoo to Warlock style decks currently in the meta. And honestly, those type of decks and even a mid-range Warlock deck does not mind trading into other minions when they go against specific matchups. And this card might potentially complement that as a tech card. Now, the main catch-22 with this card is that, well, Keleseth is one of the more popular cards in that specific archetype. However, if someone wants to try a hand buff variation of a mid-range to aggro Zoolock deck, it might actually be possible to play this card, because then you actually have your options to actually play more aggro-based 2-drops, and then you can have this card to buff up minions in your hand. Really, the power level of this card is going to be very dependent on if hand buffing can be a thing. Some people say yes, some people say no. It depends on who you ask. If you ask my 2 cents, I think it's going to be an archetype that I don't think it's going to be a specific main archetype, but I do think it's a potential powerful sub-archetype that mid-range to aggro-based warlocks can consider. Because buffing up a Doomsayer to try to get into lethal damage is nothing to laugh about. Now, the main con of this card is it does give a random minion in your hand +1/+1. It doesn't target, so yeah, you gotta keep that in mind. But overall, I think this is a good card. I think you can test this in your deck, and it's not going to be an overall detrimental to the deck, in my personal opinion. Now, next up is we get a epic spell for Warlock. And this is the Void Contract, an 8 mana spell to destroy half of each player's deck. So, you're going to take your deck, and you're going to take the opponent's deck, take half the cards, and they go out of the game. And honestly, the problem with this card is this is obviously a semi-tech card that I feel like that they're trying to give Warlock to help battle against the archetypes of pretty much class archetypes where you add cards into your deck through specific cards such as Academic Espionage Rogue. Priests are getting some new cards to support their own variation of that archetype, and even Mage has a couple cards where you add cards into your deck and such. So I feel like this is a card that's supposed to combat that, and also to try to hard counter a combo deck or specific combo decks. The problem is, except for some very, 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 very fringe Warlock decks that control Warlock decks, this is not a great card to play in a control deck. And the main reason why is most of the control Warlock decks that are in the meta, they rely on kind of some late game finishers. They rely on Gudon. They rely on maybe a I'm forgetting the name. A cube on a very powerful unit like Doomsayer, and then deal the lethal damage and such. They rely on specific cards. And you're making a card that when you destroy half the opponent's deck, sure, you might be able to destroy their victory condition, but you might destroy your victory condition. And if you do that, then you might have a very small chance to win the game if most of the cards they kept are still good to play on the board. Plus, there's also the fact that this is still, in a sense, an 8 mana do nothing to affect the board presence spell. I am really tempted to say this card's bad. However, there is a potential for this card in specific, like, I would think a mid-range to maybe even still a control Warlock that's just a value Warlock deck. It's not relying on specifically high-level finisher cards. It's not relying on specifically annoying combos. It's more just you play value-based drops and then just try to complement the value for late game. Like, have Ysera's or have, like, maybe Lich Kings and such. Like, they're not overly dependent on other cards to be the finisher, and they're just overall value-based drops that you can play both early game and late game. With that case, I feel like Void Contract then is decent, because then when you destroy half your supplies, you're not going to be that detrimental of it, because half the cards in your deck are still overall in general value-based cards that you don't mind having. It's not like complementing another card or anything like that. However, would that deck even be possible within this meta? That's left to be seen. This is a card I am so tempted to say it's bad, but I do think there's some very fringe circumstances where it could be playable. So it gets my rating of not great. But now we get the legendary Loa for Warlock. Now, for people who don't know, the two legendary for this new expansion are going to be a legendary Troll Warrior and a legendary Loa. And a Loa is basically kind of like the spirit animal, or kind of like spirit that helps pretty much their main mascot for the team, so to speak. So, in this case, for Warlock, it's Hirik the Bat. An 8-mana 1/1 that has a battle cry, fill your board with copies of this minion. Oh, okay. Now, this is obviously trying to encourage a hand buff Warlock style of deck, and hopefully you can use this as a quote-unquote finisher for those decks. Like, let's say you can get, like, this a very significant stat boost of, say, oh, you Soul Infusion this, and then you can fill your board with Free Freeze. And then, like, Magical Christmas Land, it's like, oh, I can Spirit the Bat this many times, and then get it, like, to be, like, a 7/7, and fill my board with 7/7s. Wouldn't that be amazing? The problem is, and this is a card that can vary depending on the cards that are revealed throughout the upcoming weeks, but the problem is the majority of hand buff cards that we have are very randomized. Spirit the Bat is randomized. Soul Infusion, you technically have some control over, but it's going to be very dependent on how you manipulate your hand and such. And it's going to be really hard to give this buffs in hand from time to time. So the question is, can a card that's an 8-mana fill your board with 1/1s be powerful? Well, if we get some neutral beast synergies, maybe, because in the neutral class or neutral, because it is a beast and there's something relevant to that. And it's also, you fill the board with 1/1s, and presuming it doesn't get board wipe, which that's kind of a Magical Christmas Land scenario, but let's presume the board wipe doesn't happen. You have a bunch of weenies that you can trade in with and let them die to hopefully synergize maybe with some powerful cards that have powerful synergies when creatures die. So if you look at this as 8 mana, or it could even just be an 8 mana dual peen a bunch of 1/1s to peen a bunch of different creatures to set up a Defile. Which maybe that itself is alright. I think this card is not great, but I can see some minor applications besides the obvious, if hand buff Warlock is a thing, oh hey, this is going to be a decent finisher. But to me, it's just not that great. But next up, we're going to go to the one Shaman card they revealed so far, and it's a pretty good common. It's a 6 mana Rain of Toads, and it has the ability to summon free 2/4 Toads with Taunt, Overload 3. This card is amazing. I know that seems kind of weird to say that to what is a common spell, but you gotta realize something. This is a really good upgrade card for Eamon Shaman to up its tier level. Because 2/4 taunts can be both used aggressively as well as defensively. And in Shaman, they can take advantage of the token generation a lot efficiently. Like, you can Bloodlusty tokens. You can use totems to buff the power of these tokens. There's a variety of levels to essentially make these toads a lot more effective than, oh, protect yourself against an aggro-based matchup. So yeah, this card is just, it's amazing. It's going to see play in Even Shaman, and I think it's also going to see play in just token-based Shaman decks in general, because summoning a bunch of toads is actually potentially very powerful, especially since they're 2/4 taunts, which can be used both aggressively as well as defensively. So yeah, you're probably going to see this card play in Shaman, plus it's also an amazing spell to pull from Hagatha, so, with her hero power and such, so keep that in mind. So, this card's amazing. Next up, we're going from Shaman to now Rogue cards, and we get to see the Rogue Spirit card, which in this case, it's Spirit of the Shark. It's a 4-mana 0/3 that has Stealth for 1 turn, as we mentioned Spirits do, but its special power is that your minions, battle cries, and combos trigger twice. And honestly, I think the one part of my logic of my brain is kind of saying that I should only say this card's good. The janky potential part of my brain that likes to do very janky, kind of silly brews is saying that this card is amazing. There's a lot of powerful creature-based minions and combos that we currently have in Rogue, and even some very powerful neutral battle cries and such. And the ability to duplicate it in the Rogue class archetype is absurd. Like, this could be a card that make Poghover into a potential deck. I'm still gonna wait and see. The potential is there now, though, thanks to this card. But I also think about just some silly shenanigans, such as like a turn 4 this, and then turn 5 Myra. Let's say you are on turn 3, then had Necrolean Blade, you trade it in with something, and you still have 1 durability left on Necrolean Blade, which then, when it gets destroyed, triggers off a Death Rattle. You play Spirit of the Shark on turn 4, you play Myra on turn 5, you get 2 Death Rattles applied to Myra, and then you get 2 Rattles, Death Rattle cards in your hand, and then you trade in with the Necrolean Blade, which then triggers the Death Rattles of Myra, which are 2 relevant, probably Death Rattle triggers. That is absurd, and that's one of the little combos I could think of. This is a card that has a variety of versatility in multiple archetypes. I think people are going to try this card out. No sweat about it. This is a really silly card. It's amazing. I cannot wait. There's a part of my brain that's like, yes, this is very prone to board wipes, such as Hellfire, and even like the 5-mana board wipe that Mage has, that I always forget the name of. Dragon's Fire, I think it is. But my jank brain is going to get this card upgraded from good to amazing, because there's just so many silly things you can do in a variety of rogue archetypes thanks to this card. Like, I cannot list them all off in this video, but there is a ton. So we're going to now go to another rogue spell, which in this case, it's the Cannon Barrage. A 6-mana spell that has deal free damage to a random enemy, repeat for each of your pirates. So, Magical Christmas Land scenario, what they essentially is, you want to have like, oh, I'm going to have 7 pirates on the battlefield, then I'm going to cast a spell, and then I'm going to deal 24 damage to my opponents, or my opponent's creatures, in random intervals of 3. That's the Magical Christmas Land scenario. So, let's actually think about this. This is a card that, without any pirates on the battlefield, this is 6 mana, to deal free damage to a random enemy. Yeah, that feels really bad. But obviously, this is a card that's supposed to support like a pirate tribal or pirate token based deck. And the question is really the power level of this card is going to be very, very dependent on if we can get those powerful sticky pirates or can be able to build up a bunch of cheap pirates on the battlefield so that when we go off with this spell either on 6 or theoretically 3 since you can prep this in theory, then we can hopefully, I would say at least this spell would be good if you had at least 4 pirates on the battlefield. But anything more than 4, it's going to feel amazing. But anything less than 3, then the card feels pretty bad. But overall, really, I'm going to say not great but for this card. But the rating can change if we get a lot of relevant sticky or a lot of cheap pirates to make this spell go off without a hitch. Next up is a priest spell, where you surrender to madness. It's a free mana spell that will destroy 3 of your mana crystals. In exchange, though, you give all your minions in your deck +2/+2. So, while it is really, really tempting to say this card is bad, I do think it actually has some potential for kind of mid-range priest decks, and even dragon priest decks. I think many people are going to go at this card and kind of take what I like to call the Keleseth bias. They feel like, oh, I got to play this card as early as possible so I can get the maximum stat benefits for my deck and such. And yeah, there's an argument for that. But I do think this is a card that you don't mind playing this on like turn 7. And then with the few cards you have left in your deck, or hey, if you have ways to add cards into your deck, we're going to get to that shortly, having minions that are mid-game and late-game be a lot more powerful with a stat boost, or even having late-game finishers become more ridiculous with a stat boost, it makes this card potentially very absurd late-game. It helps you upgrade stats of your minions, which then helps trade into late-game minions that they control if they don't have the stat buff. Honestly, an upgraded Primordial Drake is kind of absurd. I think this is a card that is specifically tailored to mid-range to late-game decks. I think it's a trap to try to put this in aggro-based decks, but I think it's still going to be tried at the very least as an experiment. Overall, though, I think the card is good, but I can see an argument for the card to be bad, especially if the only decks that can take advantage of this is aggro decks, and really, aggro decks do not want to destroy 3 of their mana early game. But I'm going to make an argument, due to the fact that this could be played in mid-range to late-game decks, that this is actually a good card. It can be toyed with, it can be tested out, and not have too much detriment. Next up, we get a Priest 1-cost minion. So, Priest players, keep your ears on this one. It's the Spirit of the Dead. A 1-mana 0 free with stealth for 1 turn, as we mentioned before. And it has the ability that after a friendly minion dies, shuffle a 1-cost copy of it into your deck. Okay, we're going to have to talk about layers of this card, because this card, I can tell you right off the bat, it's amazing. But let's go through the multiple steps of why this card is amazing. First of all, let's ignore that whole factor that after a friendly minion dies, shenanigan powerful battlefield effect. Let's just ignore that entirely. And this is just a 1-mana, steal-free minion that cannot be targeted by the opponent if you play it on turn 1. That, in Buff Priest in general, is very, very absurdly powerful. I mean, you play this on turn 1, and then on turn 2, you could get, depending on your hand, can make this either into a pretty much 1-mana 5/5, 6/6, 7/7 with the right cards. Like, you can say, for example, turn 2, play Radiant Elemental, then if you have 2 Power Word of Shields, play Power Word of Shield, play Power Word of Shield on the Spirit of the Dead, making it a pretty much a 0/7, and then play Inner Fire on it, and making it on 2 mana having a 7/7 minion. That is absurd. Oh, and by the way, if also someone decides to kill off the Radiant Elemental and they don't decide to silence the effects on this, you can actually shuffle a 1-cost copy of Radiant Elemental into your deck. Yeah, just by that factor alone makes the card absurd. But let's even now just talk about the effect in general. This is actually a really great card for mid-range to even potentially aggro-based priest decks, because most priest decks, they like to have value-based minions, such as their Dustbreakers, their Lich Keens, pretty much decks that either affect the battlefield or even the Spiteful Summoners that they use to hopefully get off a pretty good minion with it and such. And what this card essentially does is it shuffles a copy of the card. It's not a 1/1 copy, it is a copy of the exact minion, but it only costs 1 mana, which is supremely powerful late game. Because then you can actually just be like, oh, I'm going to play, like, let's say on turn 8, you were able to early game shuffle in, say, a copy of, let's just say a random value based minion. Let's say, like, Elise the Starseeker. I think that's the one that's in this, or no, it's Elise the Trailblazer. That's the one that's in the standard meta at the moment. So let's say you played Elise the Trailblazer, you had Spirit of the Dead out, you trade your Elise into something, and then you shuffle into your deck. So they build up their board presence on turn 7, and then you on turn 8 have a Psychic Scream in hand, and then draw your Elise. Then you can just Psychic Scream, then play Elise to still have a board presence while you do the board wipe like that. And there's just little applications like that that could be potentially very powerful in multiple archetypes. Plus, this also does a heavy synergy with the legendary Loa, which we're going to get to. But I just feel like this card just has a lot of potential to make some either very less successful archetypes into more powerful archetypes, and it's just a really, really powerful effect. I mean, Priest has some pretty greedy cards that if you make it 1 mana, it's absurd to play for 1 mana. Yeah, this card's amazing. This card will see play in Priest. I would be dumbfounded if it doesn't see play in Priest. In my personal opinion. Next up, we're going to talk about the legendary minion, which is their Loa in this case, that they revealed for Priest, which is Bromsandi, the Dead. A 7 mana 7/7, so War Golem stats. And it has the effect of a battle cry that you draw 1 cost minions from your deck until your hand is full. So, obviously, this is supposed to synergize with Spirit of the Dead. Like, you pretty much have Spirit of the Dead out, you trade into your minions and such, and then shuffle 1 cost copy of your minions into your deck, and then you use Bromsandi to draw those 1 cost minions from your deck, and hopefully have a very high powerful turn 8 where you play a bunch of very powerful 1-drops, or very powerful well, 1 cost drops in general, but they could be like 8 mana based creatures that are just now costing 1 mana, Dance the Spirit of the Dead, etc., etc., etc. Variety circumstances, supposed to be silly shenanigans late game. So, honestly, if we take that whole Spirit of the Dead combo out of the way, which, by the way, is potentially very powerful, so don't get me wrong on that, I think this is just a decent card in Priest in general, just as a way to filter your deck out. Because late game Priest, they sometimes want to draw into their late game powerful spells. We all had that one experience in Hearthstone where we needed to draw like a 5-drop or a 7-drop late game, and we drawed the 1-drop, and we felt really, really bad. Bromsandi essentially prevents that by allowing us to draw 1-cost spells from our deck, so we draw a Northshire Clerics, we maybe draw that 1-drop Elemental from Journey to Ungaro, etc. So then, hopefully now, our spells that are still left in the deck that we draw into next turn are a lot more effective with the current board state and hopefully helps control the game. But still, that being said, this is still absurdly powerful with Spirit of the Dead. Like, you can do some silly new potential deck archetypes thanks to that combo alone. And I think that's is what's making what I would originally say just a good card into an amazing card. I think some people are going to try a new archetype with Bromsandi and Spirit of the Dead. It might be a combo deck, it might just be a general greedy value-based minion deck, but I think the potential is there. It might even just see play as just a splash into Spiteful Priest just to have some late game shenanigans. Overall, this card is really good, but it feels amazing, and I think it is amazing because of the potential to make some very high powerful archetypes. Little drink break there. Anyway, now we go on to the Paladin cards, which in this case, it's the 3 mana Timeout. And it's a spell that has an ability that your hero is immune until your next turn. This one's a pretty quick one to do. This one's amazing. The factor is this is a proactive ice block, which actually has a lot more powerful applications in Paladin than people give right off the bat. This can be used to help stall control decks and help stall your combo decks, get to your combo, get to your late game finisher. But it can also just be used in mid range decks just as a way to protect yourself, and then you can trade in with your weapon and then not get dealt damage because your hero has immunity. So this one's pretty good. This card is pretty amazing, at least within the current meta. It might change into like a good rating once the meta rotates out and we don't have some good late game finishers like Tyrion and such. But the card at the moment, it's amazing. It's a pretty easy card to rate. Next up is the Immortal Prelate. A 2-mana 1-free minion with Death Rattle. Shuffle this into your deck, it keeps any enchantments. This one is a weird one. Now, I love playing Buff Paladin, I love playing Quest Paladin, and this is going to be a fun tool in those type of deck archetypes. Because the factor is that this could, in theory, be a 2-mana... Well, let's just say we put a Blessings of Kings on this. This could be a 2-mana 5/7 that when it dies, it shuffles it into your hand. And then you just have a 2-mana 5/7 that you can play, that you can buff more, and then the buff still keeps... It's kind of... It's a Kingsbane for Paladin that they can keep 2 copies. Now, the main catch of this card is that it is prone to silence. But even then, that might not be too bad, because the potential of this, getting this as a target for silence rather than other your late game value minions that you probably want to buff as well, that's actually potentially very powerful just to try to fish out silence spells using this card. Also, the one significant power thing about this card is keep in mind it says it keeps any enchantments. So that's including spells that target the minion, but also as well as creature-based buffs. So the one I can think of is Fungalmancer. That one is potentially very powerful. But I can also think of cards that... I'm forgetting the exact name of the card from the Frozen Throne. But it's a card that you can give a friendly minion Death Rattle, resummon this minion. You see it a lot play in Arena. I think it's called Gravekeeper or such. I'm probably going to post a picture of it right next to me when I talk about it. But essentially that with synergy with Immortal Prelate is pretty silly because then you can, when it dies, you shuffle... I feel like in theory it's going to resummon this minion and then you shuffle copying to your deck. Now, I could be wrong, and someone could correct me in the comments, because I could see that not potentially working at all. But there's also a lot of more sillier shenanigans, such as like with the legendary Paladin weapon that came from Kobolds and Catacombs. With this is kind of absurd. So, yeah, I think this card is potentially a very good card to toy out with. You can test it and buff Paladin without much sweat. I don't think it upgrades the power level of the deck too consistently to make it like a top tier meta deck or anything, but I do think it's going to be a fun deck to toy with, and it's going to be fun to toy with this card. So it's a good card. Next up, we get the legendary Loa from Paladin, which in this case is Shivala, the Tiger. A 25 mana 7/5 with Divine Shield, Rush, and Lifesteal that has the ability that this minion will cost 1 less for each mana you spent on spells for the game. So let's say you spent, like you did, 2 Blessing of Kings, and say, oh, we'll just go off random and say, like a Divine Potion and such, so you spent 10 mana, then this will cost 15, and then you, like, heal yourself with the 8 mana heal spell that I always lay on hands, then this will cost, like, 2 mana and such, and stuff like that. So, essentially, spells that you play in Paladin, then will make this reduced to, hopefully, very, very low cost. And by factor alone, I think this card is amazing. Control and buff Paladin decks really needed a good mid-game to late-game threat to help them win that is not the quest for buff Paladin or not like a late-game finisher for Paladin. And this card kind of covers that to a T. Being able to try to get this out very cheap and combo it with some very powerful buffs like Spike Ridge Steed makes this card absurd. But it can also synergize with cards like, say, oh, I don't know, Faceless Manipulator, Brewmaster. I mean, there's even Baleful Banker. Like, the one combo that people have been talking about right off the bat, and I'll mention it right off the bat, is that people are thinking of ways to empty out the Paladin deck, then play Shivala for 0, then play Baleful Banker to shuffle Shivala back into your deck, Then play the 5 mana spell that I always forget the name of, but it's to draw a card and then you deal damage to an enemy character equal to the card's converted mana cost. Deal 25 damage to the opponent's face. Is that absurdly powerful? Yes. Can you go late game enough for that to work? Potentially, with how much dirtily the meta could potentially be if Control Paladin is a thing, I'd say the possibility is yes. But even then, this is just a decent card in general, even without the variety of shenanigans you can do with it, because getting 7 to 14 health, if you use the legendary scientist from Boomsday Lab, to get that much life gain back to and healing the Paladin, that's really good. Really good Paladin decks I saw that are not aggro based, that want to be control and late game based, need to have good healing options. And Cheval the Tiger will heal you for a lot. And that with combo with Zilliats and other cards, it just makes this card amazing. I think Control and Buff Paladin just got upgraded thanks to this card. It's just absurd. Next up, we got Het's Lord Malacras, so we're going from not a legendary Loa, but we're actually going to the Mage to their legendary Troll Warrior. And Het's Lord Malacras, it's an 8 mana 5/5 that has a battle cry to add a copy of your opening hand to your hand, except this card. I think this is, in general, just a good card. This is going to be a card that I think it's going to be a skill tester card, because it's going to be very dependent on opponents evaluating their starting hand and being like, oh, do I want to keep this one very powerful late game card in my hand, for knowing that I can use Het's Lord Malacras to draw another copy of that card into my hand? That's something to consider. This also has potential in Quest Mage, because those are copies, so if you get copies of random spells that started in your opening, and that is a way to go off with the quest pretty quick. Oh yeah, not to mention you also get a copy of the quest again. Just FYI on that one. So yeah, I feel like this is a good card. I think Quest Mage and also just value-based mages, maybe even Big Spell Mage, will toy with the card as just a card draw engine in itself. But I don't think it's going to like upgrade the power level significantly. But I do think it's overall just a really good card. It's a fun card for Mage to toy with. Next up, another Mage card we got, a rare they have, which is the Pyromaniac, a 3 mana 3/4. Whenever your hero power kills a minion, draw a card. I think this is a card that's going to be good, because I think it has good stats for a free drop, and it also just really has a decent ability that mages will not mind taking advantage of. It allows you to draw cards when you use your hero power for trades, which most mages in general will do that. So I think this in general in Arena is going to feel pretty good. However, the problem that this card has, it has the awkward thing of being a free drop, while mages have a very competitive free drop slot at the moment, and have the awkward notion of this being a draw engine where already Mage has enough draw-based engines. Now, this could be something to consider for, like, odd Mage. It's definitely something to consider. But I do think free drops are very competitive, so it'll be interesting to see if people toy with this card. I think still the card is good, but I do think it's going to be having a hard time to be played until post-rotation when we rotate to the new standard next year. So, we shall see. So then we go from Mage to Hunter cards that got revealed, and it's just a few commons, but they're actually pretty interesting commons. First off is the Baited Arrow, which is a 5 mana, deal free damage, and has the overkill trigger to summon a 5/5 Devilsaur. So most people are giving this a comparison to Bane of Doom. It's just essentially do 5 mana, deal 2 damage. If you deal more damage, you summon the Devilsaur, yada yada yada, etc. etc. People are doing that comparison. I still think, though, even though this card doesn't seem amazing at first, because 5 mana just dealing free damage, if you just use it for that alone, just feels anticlimactic. People need to remember that this still, it doesn't say deal free damage to a minion. It's deal free damage to anything. That's including the opponent's face. So yeah, just by that factor alone, and the fact that you could still use this as a way to get off a really problematic, annoying early game minion, so you could still have a board presence with a 5/5, makes this card pretty good. It's a card that I think will potentially see play in Spell Hunter just as a test, but I don't think it upgrades the teal level. But still, the fact that you can deal directly to the opponent's face, also as well as use this as a way to build up board presence and control the board presence, it's a good card, in my personal opinion. Next up, we get the 1 mana Spring Paw, which is a 1/1 beast with Rush to add that has a battle cry to add a 1/1 Lynx with Rush to your hand. And honestly, this is probably going to be one of the sleeper common of the sets. Or maybe not. Maybe people are already seeing that this card is actually pretty amazing. Because yeah, this card is actually amazing. This is a very amazing common that we got for Hunter. Because this is potentially a very powerful one-drop hunters can use in, say, Quest Hunter, for example. Because Quest Hunter needs their one-drops. You generate a one-drop, you play a one-drop. And they're also beasts, so you can use it to synergize with beast-specific shenanigans that hunters do have. I mean, you can turn 6, play this, and then or not even turn 6, turn 4, play this, play Hunter's Command to deal 5 damage to something, so that's absurdly powerful. One-drop beasts have significantly powerful synergies in Hunters, so don't underestimate that. Plus, also, this just has specifically powerful synergies within, say, Death Rattle Hunter, or even like hunters that run the Death Knight, because then they can actually have more variety of range of powerful minions they can make into zombies because they can give it Rush thanks to Spring Paw. And by the way, also just get a 1/1 with Rush in their hand just in case they need a trade later game or something like that. So overall, yeah, this card's amazing. It's going to see play. It's just a really, 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 really good common. It's an absurdly good common, in my personal opinion. And finally, now that we're almost going to catch up with one last card, and I'm not going to give a rating to this card because I still want to see more from the set, but I will at least talk about my little insights on it. That is the Savage Striker. The battle cry is deal damage to an enemy minions equal to your hero's attack. Okay, if I was going to give a rating to this card right off the bat, I would say this card is legitimately bad. And the reason why I would say that is because while the battle cry is a nice late game effect, at the current moment it just feels like you need to invest a lot of bad cards, aka cards to buff the druid's attack, to make this card decent. I mean, the stats are decent, don't get me wrong, but I feel like it's really hard to give this a rating at the moment because I feel like I need to see more druid cards to see if they have a sub-archetype where they actually will buff up their attack power a lot more significantly. Like, if we get, like, an Eternium Rover-like effect, like a 1-mana 1/3 for Druid that has the ability that when it gets dealt damage, then Druid will get attacked based on, say, damage that minion is dealt, or some shtick like that, or get +2 attack, then Savage Striker becomes a lot more tempting of a card. But at the current moment, I really want to give this card the quote-unquote bad rating, but I will say that rating is very malleable, and I even kind of almost don't want to give it a rating, based on the fact that we haven't really seen all the Druid cards yet, and I feel like it would be fair to would be fair to judge until we see what Druid gets in this set. Now, overall, we finally catch up with all the cards that got revealed before the big spoiler stream starting on, well, as I'm recording this as of tomorrow, but I don't know when this video is going to be published since I have to do some editing to make sure the card art's in there and all that stuff, but hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. And just to let you know, the way I'm going to cover the cards that are going to be revealed the upcoming weeks is that I'm going to try to get a video out either on Saturday or Sunday, which is going to be cards that have been revealed from that week. Now, on the final week, when they do the final reveal stream and such, then I'm just going to try to get a video out real quick of the last few cards before the pre-release event that's happening on the weekend, which I believe now I actually set up a streaming event that I'm going to stream at one of my local game stores, Astro Kitty. I like the place. It's in Lawrence, Kansas. It's a fun store. I would recommend going there. So I'm going to stream there, the pre-release event, and just have some fun shenanigans. I'm going to set up the tavern event and all that stuff. I got to actually get to that once I finish up with this video. Overall, though, I hope you all have a lovely day. This is Jordan Leroy Hansen, also known as LevDev, signing out.